Okay, well, thank you guys so much. I have been working with the Social Innovation Fund in a variety of capacities for the last 3 years or so, and it's really exciting to get to work with your data and to serve as a resource to such fantastic grantees. So today, what we're going to do is we'll provide an overview of the data supplement. We'll go through each tab, and I'll highlight some important things to note. In particular, I'll be focusing on some of the changes to the supplement this round. So for those of you who are returning grantees, I really want to highlight those changes so that they're not a surprise. And for those of you who are new grantees, I'll also be talking a little bit about some of the common challenges that we see with submitting information in the data supplement. And I'd welcome any questions, comments, or feedback from you all at the end of our conversation today. So just to get started, I wanted to just emphasize to you that there are a lot of really great resources available to help you as you complete your data supplement. And I'll go through a couple of those very quickly. So the first one being the Data Supplement User Guide, which is available to all Pay for Success grantees. Your program officer should have emailed you a copy of the user guide document. It looks like this here on your screen. And that contains screenshots of the various tabs of the data supplement, as well as information on what content should be included in each tab of the supplement. Additionally, we have a really great document about how to complete your narrative report. So I'm not going to be talking about the narrative today, but I would encourage you to use this document to provide information in eGrants about the progress of your report in a more narrative or storytelling format. And then the other final document that we provide is the Frequently Asked Questions document, and that goes over some of the most common questions that we've received about the data supplement over the past couple of years. All right, so I'm going to transition a little bit and we'll talk about the actual supplement itself. So I'm going to share my screen here, so just give us a second. Okay. And so now I'm going to just walk us through the supplement itself. So the first tab is what we call the Project Plan tab. This is where we ask you to submit information about your organization. So this is information we use to talk about the location of SIF services and to highlight impacts of programs that are operating in particular congressional districts and regions, and also within particular focus areas. So the first part of the Project Plan tab.
So I just want to interrupt for 1 second. The display on the screen is really small and it's hard to read. So if you cannot read your screen, up in the, you can drill down. There's a plus sign at the top of the screen that you can increase the size of the image.
Make it 50. We're going to zoom in just a little bit just to make that a little bit easier for you guys. All right. So this first section is information about your program. So where you're located. We've added in these 2 fields for start date and end date, and those dates should correspond to the dates for your period of performance on your notice of funding availability. We also ask that you include a 1-paragraph description of your SIF portfolio. And in this year, this round's user guide, there are actually examples of what kinds of information you should provide in your SIF portfolio description. We do use these for the website and also to respond to data requests. So the more information you can provide here, the better. And then the other primary purpose of the Project Plan tab is to outline information about the budget for your award. So the first section contains information on your SIF award by fiscal year. So, for example, in this situation, you have a $3 million award that was given in FY 2016, and that award is set up to be dispersed across 2 program years with $1.5 million for each program year. So for that information, if you are a new grantee, we have attempted to pre-populate that information, but if the breakdown has changed across your 2 program years, we just ask that you go ahead and go into eGrants and provide us with the most up-to-date information. One caveat about this is that we are asking that that be the information that's in eGrants. So if you have like a working budget, for example, that you're thinking about, just make sure that that corresponds to what's in eGrants, and that allows your program officer to reach out to you if a budget amendment might be necessary. And then down here we have a more detailed breakdown of that budget across the program years. And so this would be a breakdown of that budget across, in this case, 2 program years. And we ask you to separate out the funds that are designated to be expended to subs. And so when we say subs, that could be subrecipient services or to your service recipients. And so for our newer grantees, for the 2016 grantees, you've been asked to specify this in the line items in your budget. And so we're going to ask you to go through that budget and tell us what that total is. If you have any questions about this, we would encourage you to contact your program officer or myself, and we're happy to look through the budgets with you. But in general, that federal funds is about 80% of the budget. And then, typically a similar composition for the grantee funds, although it's not necessarily required. And then down below, we ask you to put information about the total budget for those funds and what percentage of those funds are coming from cash funds versus in-kind funds. If you are working with subrecipients and you are a 2016 grantee, then you would also have some budget information about the subgrantee cash match or in-kind match to be received. But for our 2014 grantees, all of the match funds that are to be raised are counted towards the grantee's match requirement. So you would not have any information in the sub-cash match or sub-in-kind match, because any funds that they would be contributing would be counted towards your grantee level match requirement. Those subfields are exclusively for grants in which the subrecipient is being required to commit grant funds in excess of the grantee's match requirement. That's a common area of confusion, so I just wanted to emphasize that for folks. And then I guess the most significant change to the data supplement this round is that we are no longer asking you to report on information on your actual expenditures. So this is a really significant change from all of our prior data supplements. And this is something that we decided to do in consultation with the program officers in the Office of Grants Management. And so from now on, all of your actual expenditure reporting is going to happen in your FFR, your Federal Financial Report. The only piece of information that we are going to ask you to update here is information on match funds received, and that's because that information is not currently collected in the FFR. So in these fields down below in rows 46 through 50, you're going to be reporting information on your match funds received to date. This will be pre-populated with information from your last data supplement, so if this information has changed, we ask that you highlight any changes in green with bold font so that your program officer knows that this information has changed. But otherwise, you would just be updating these cells here in column G, which would be information on match funds that have been received during the current reporting period. Also, if you have any questions about this, in addition to the information that's in the user guide, you can also find a glossary of key terms at the bottom of each tab. All right, so I'm going to pause for questions. If you have any questions about this tab, you should be able to hit *1, and we can open the line for those questions now.
Again, press *1 if you have a question, and unmute your phone and record your name. Thank you.
You're also welcome to type it into the chat or into the Q&A. Make sure to send those to all panelists if it's the Q&A.
And we do have a question.
Go ahead.
And we do have a question coming from the phone lines from Melissa Penny. Your line is open.
A quick question.
Miss
Penny,
your line's open. Yes.
Great, thank you. So I just had a quick question on the sub versus non-sub costs on the grantee share in particular. We were recently instructed to make sure we didn't include that in our e-grants budget. So is this just I guess I'm wondering where that, is this just us telling you what that is because it's not recorded in our e-grants budget? I feel like the last time we did this data supplement, we were dinged because what we reported in here didn't match e-grants, so we updated e-grants and then we're told to take it out of e-grants. So I guess I'm just curious what numbers I should be putting where.
So this is Katie. In your e-grant, oh, can you hear me, Melissa?
Yes, yep, I can.
Yeah. Okay, so this is Katie. In your e-grants budget, were you advised by OGN to put SRS after budget line items that were going towards the subrecipient amount, or no?
We were only for the CNCS share. We were told to take it out for the grantee share.
Okay.
So our current budget doesn't show any breakdown in the grantee share. Like if you looked at e-grants, it would look like nothing, I guess, was a sub-cost. I don't know.
Right.
So I don't mind putting it in here in the data supplement. I think I just want to make sure I'm clear on, like, if we're going to be held to what's in e-grants, what we put in this data supplement isn't going to match.
We'll take that under advisement. Go ahead, please, and put it into the data supplement, and then we will have an out-of-conference meeting with OGM, and we'll send a message out to all Pay for Success data supplement submissions.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Katie.
Do we have any other calls or any other questions on the line?
There are no other questions in queue at this time.
Okay. In that case, I'll go ahead and move on and talk a bit about our Match Funders tab. So we are still asking for information on match funders, but one significant change from last round to this round is that we're no longer asking you to report on the amount of match funds contributed from each of your top funders, but we are interested in knowing more information about your top 5 match funders at the grantee level. This information is really useful to us as we start to think about where match funders are located, if they're in particular industries, and also just getting a sense of the landscape of our match funders. And it can be very useful to your program officer to facilitate conversations about how match funding is going and if there are any particular funders that might be a concern. So you can enter information on those match funders here. We ask that you list the funder, the state of the funder, and whether they are currently active or inactive. You can also list at the grantee level match funders that are projected. So those would be funders for whom funds have not yet been received, but that you are anticipating donations from. You can also use the comment section to communicate with your program officer if there are any updates with a particular match funder. And we would ask, the other piece with that is to designate the status of the match funder. So active funders are those who've made a contribution during the current reporting period. And inactive funders would be those who've made contributions in the past, but not during the current reporting period. And then for each funder, we would just ask that you specify if they are contributing cash or in-kind funds, or both for Pay for Success. And then at the sub-match funders level, that would be very similar, with the main difference being that we are only asking for you to report on sub-grantee match funders for those subs who have their own match requirement, right? So that would be for our 2016 Pay for Success grantees who are working with sub-recipients. And so if the sub-recipient has a match requirement, we would ask that you list the top 5 match funders for each sub-recipient. So just providing that information here lets us know how those sub-recipients are progressing in terms of their match commitments. But again, we're not asking you to report on the amount of match funds, right? Any questions about match funders? If you wanted to ding in for those, you can press *1 now.
So if there are no further questions, we'll move on to the next tab. We'll give it a couple more seconds.
Okay. All right. So next I'm going to talk a little bit about our sub-info tab. And so this is really one of the places where we're collecting the most nuanced information on your okay. All right. So while we work on getting our screen to a viewable size, I'm just going to talk a little bit more generally about the goals of the sub-info tab. So this is really where we collect the most nuanced information on each of your sub-recipients or service recipients. And it is where we collect information that we use to respond to data requests about programs in particular topic areas. We get a lot of requests from the White House, from Congress, and from other organizations about, for example, what kinds of programming are we doing around job training. And so we use this information to quickly and efficiently respond to those requests. So we ask that you do keep this information as up to date as possible. It contains information on the sub number. So for these are actually pre-populated by CNCS. So if you're a new grantee, they're going to be blank, and they will stay blank. We'll fill them in for you. The name of that sub-recipient or service recipient, the subtype. So for the 2014 grantees, I just want to emphasize that we've updated these subtypes to match the subtypes for the 2016 NOFA. So if you formerly had sub-grantees, those are now referred to as sub-recipients. And if you formerly had sub-recipients, those are now referred to as service recipients. This information should be updated in your data supplement already, but we would ask that you just verify that information when you go through it. Also, the supplements are pre-populated with information from your last supplement. So, you know, if you haven't added any new subs, we would just ask that you go ahead and review this information and make sure that it's up to date. In addition to providing information about the status of each of your subs, we also ask for information about the focus area, the types of interventions provided. Please note that these cells are conditional upon completing the focus area, so make sure that you select that, otherwise you can't select the subsequent ones. And then we ask for one paragraph program summary, much like the grantee summary. We use these to respond to data requests and also on the website. And then we ask that you update this key successes section. And one thing that's new for this time is that we're asking that you update the key successes with information from the current reporting period. So if you have an inactive sub, this information would be blank. But if you have subs that are active during the current reporting period, then we want to know about what successes have happened this reporting period. And then the other information on this tab is just information about the location of your sub-recipient or service recipient. And we ask for the full address, including the ZIP+4 code. The ZIP+4 codes are really important when we respond to data requests because they allow us to figure out congressional districts. And so especially right now as we're talking to members of the House and the Senate about the Social Innovation Fund and CNCS more broadly, this information is more important than ever. And then also information on the primary contact for each organization you're working with. Okay. And then I'll talk a little bit about sub-awards, and then I'll pause for questions here. All right. And so on the sub-awards tab, it pulls over information from your sub-info tab. So it pulls over the sub-name, sub-number, and status. And then we just ask that you put the year of the initial award, which should correspond to their start date. And then one of the most significant changes that we've made to the data supplement this year is that in addition to removing expenditure information from the project plan tab, we have also removed that information from your sub-awards tab. So from now on, all that we're asking you to report on are the funds that have been awarded, not the funds that have been expended, and not any match funds that have been raised. So it's just the award amount, and then we ask you to separate out what portion of that award is coming from the federal share, or in e-grants that would be labeled as the CNCS share, and the portion that's coming from the grantee share in e-grants. And so you're not going to have this breakdown in your e-grants budget, but just keeping in mind that for each award, some portion of those funds are coming from the CNCS side and some are coming from the grantee side. The other important thing to note for Pay for Success is that these funds do include cash and in-kind contributions, and so those are listed together here. So this is both cash and in-kind award value for each of your sub-recipients or service recipients. And then you would update that information with each program year, up to 3 program years for Pay for Success. And then you'll notice that the cumulative totals calculate automatically, so you don't really need to do anything with that. Just making sure that the awards are updated. If you do have any changes to the awards, we just ask again that you highlight those cells in green, that you also notify your program officer of these changes via email as you submit your data supplement. All right, so I'm going to pause here. If anyone has questions about the sub-info or sub-awards tab, you can go ahead and push *1 for those.
Operator, is there anyone on the line?
And there are no questions in queue at this time.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to move to our last tab of the data supplement. And this is our sub-service sites tab. So this is one of the tabs where we've really made some changes this time around in terms of the reporting procedures. So it's similar in terms of the kinds of information that we're collecting, but in addition to collecting information on project locations, we've really been trying to think about how we can capture the impacts of Pay for Success projects and be able to distinguish between projects that are operating with nonprofits versus actual jurisdictions where you might be working with a city, a county, or a state entity. And so what you'll notice in the user guide is that there are some revised instructions for this tab, and I'm going to go over those together with you today. But what you are going to do on this tab is you'll provide a separate line for each entity that you are working with. And so if you are struggling with what that might be, for example, you might choose to list in each entity that you have an MOU with. So let's say you're working with a city and a county. You would have a separate line for each entity. And for each of those, you would provide the sub number and the sub name. And then you would also provide the name of the project. And so we ask that you generate these names yourself, but if you are working with another Pay for Success grantee on a particular project, then we ask that you coordinate with that grantee to ensure that you use the same name across those two projects, so that we know that it's all one project even though it's being sponsored by multiple grantees. And then we've added this new column, so column D is new. And we're asking you to provide the name of the service location, and so this would be the name of the entity that you're working with. If you are working with, it's really important, if you're working with a city, a state, or a county, then we want you to use a very particular format for entering this information. So if you're working with a city, we want you to say city of city name, comma, state, and then after that colon, tell us the name of the entity within the city that you are working with. So here we have, for example, the city of Cityville, North Dakota, and they're working with the mayor's office. Then the address information that you provide would be the address for this entity, right? So this is the address for the mayor's office if we were to contact them. Same thing here for the county. Now, if you were working with an entity that was not the city or the county, please do not use this format. So, for example, here with the Florida Social Innovation Initiative, this is like a nonprofit that you might be working with. So they may be operating within a particular city or county, but you're not going to use that format unless you're directly working with that jurisdiction. And then we're going to provide the address for each of these entities, and making sure that we do have a name of an entity that you are working with for each of these. Okay, all right. Well, I think we can open up the line for questions, for final questions. So if you had a question about how we already went through and you want to ping in about that, please feel free to do so. Or if you have questions about the subservice sites tab in particular, please let me know. We are eager to hear from you.
Okay, so we'll be able to now see the questions that you had submitted. So sorry for the delay on that. When we were sharing our screen, that was not visible. So can you clarify how the match funds should be reported for subgrantees that raise their own match funds?
Yes, I can. So the answer to this depends a little bit on the way that agreement is structured. And so if you have, let's say you're a 2014 grantee, and you are working with a particular sub-recipient or service recipient, and they are contributing match funds, but those match funds are counted towards your grantee level match requirement, right? So they're not in excess of your grantee level match, they're just counting towards your one-to-one match requirement. If that is the case, then you don't have to tell us that on here. It would just be included in the grantee match. So like when we go back to the project plan, that would be part of the grantee cash match to be received or the grantee in-kind match to be received. Now, if you are a 2016 grantee and you are working with sub-recipients and they have that third level of matching, right, where they're matching in addition to your grantee level match, then those funds would be reported on the project plan tab under the sub-cash match to be received or the sub-in-kind match to be received. And the same thing down here when it comes to the actual funds that have been received, you would put here information on the sub-cash match received or the sub-in-kind match received. But that's only in circumstances where the sub-recipient has their own match requirement. Now, you may, like for 2014 grantees, you may have set up an agreement where, you know, they've committed to contribute towards your match requirement, but this would only apply in situations where they're contributing outside of the grantee level match. Does that answer that question? I don't know who had raised that. But that's a really good question, I'll just say, because I know that's something that's come up quite a lot in the past. Okay, thanks, Griselda.
Okay, so if you have any questions, please hit *1 or type your questions into the chat or the Q&A feature that we can now see.
And we do have one question from the phone lines. That question is coming from Nasri. Your line is open.
So my question was that if we have a sub working in a location with multiple entities, which entity address needs to be reported under the service location name?
That's a great question. So if they're working with multiple entities, we would love to see each of those entities listed. So let's say you have, oh, sorry, here, I'm gonna share my screen here, 1 second. Okay. So here, we're asking a question about our sub-service tab. And so the question, if for those of you on the line, if you missed that, the question was, okay, well, who do I put under service location name if one of my subs is working with multiple entities? And that's actually what we would expect to see. So for example, like here, we have one sub. In this case, the sub is Social Innovation Services. They actually have 2 different projects happening. And then even within a single project, they're working with 2 separate entities. So if they're working with like the mayor's office, some sort of county level entity, maybe also a nonprofit, we want to see each of those entities listed. And that's really useful for us when we start to think about, okay, how do we map the impact of Social Innovation Fund projects over time? And so we'd love to see all of those entities listed, at least to the best of your ability. Now, one decision rule that you can use is, you know, thinking about, okay, are these entities for which you have an MOU, right? So like, are there entities of which there are established agreements? So, you know, there may be other parties who are sort of more tangentially involved. We're really most interested in those entities that you're working with directly. Does that address your question?
Yes, thank you.
If there are no further questions, again, we thank you all and have a pleasant afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes today's call. Thank you for your participation.